And so when you bring those data sets together and you lay data science over the top, we're able to come out with some fantastically accurate, not just forecasts of what's likely to happen on a flight, but also retrospectively what happened.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. Our mission is to show the many paths to net zero for an industry that is one of the hardest to decarbonize. So every week we speak with airline, airport, travel, and technology executives to help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you're a frequent flyer, an airline executive, if you care about sustainability, or just love traveling, welcome aboard. This is a show by Simpliflying, who have been helping build trust in travel for over 15 years. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Cirium, which is empowering the global aviation industry to reach a more sustainable future with the most accurate aircraft emissions data. The show is also supported by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of Simpliflying.
Data allows us to make good decisions. But data can be confusing, especially when it comes to sustainability data. That's where Cirium comes in. That's where Jeremy Bowen comes in. Because Cirium is not only sponsoring this season of Sustainability in the Air, which I'm extremely grateful for, Cirium is actually helping airlines with real insights into what is happening with their carbon emissions today. Because they know through their fleet analyzer that new aircrafts like electric aircraft or eVTOLs are a long way away. So what can be done today by airlines in addressing sustainability and climate change concerns through really good insights derived from data around sustainability? That's exactly what our conversation today is about. Jeremy, Cirium is a data company. We are talking about sustainability. Where do these two intersect?
Well, Shashank, it's a good question. We've been helping the industry for many, many years to solve the challenges that they brought up. And the industry, as we know, having going back decades and decades, we know that there's always challenges, there's always new things that need to be done. So we've been using data and analytics to help for many, many years. And so now I think as we come out of the pandemic, if it's not number one on an airline CEO's to-do list, it's certainly getting close there. And so our strategy is to be the industry trusted partner. They've known us for many years with our data, and now we need to lean in and help to decarbonize and meet these 2050 goals.
The interesting thing is, I know Cirium for your on-time performance report, which comes out every month. Is there a sustainability data set that you are doing similar to that OTP report already?
It's a really good question, Shashank. There isn't. We have looked at it. We think at the moment that there's so many different angles to sustainability. We want to be absolutely sure that as the market settles on the right thing, in terms of this is what's going to be the benchmark, this is what's going to be the one that everyone recognizes, because there's lots of things out there at the moment, and then we'll see whether we do it. We have spoken about it, but we don't think the time's quite right yet.
Right. You mentioned earlier that coming out of COVID, sustainability seems to be the number one priority for airline CEOs. Now, this doesn't seem like fake news or a fad that's going away. Is that the feedback you're getting from airline executives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's obviously that sustainability question has been around for many years. And I think now there's a realization that because a lot of everyone's signed up for 2050, it's really hard. It's really hard. We can play around the edges. We can look at the areas which are not necessarily the aviation fuel. We can look at the airports, electric vehicles, all these great things. When you walk to an airport and see we've saved X amount of power, that's great, but it's round the edges. At its heart, to decarbonize long haul, particularly aviation, is really difficult. And so I think there's a realization now that the pandemic is abating. This has to be acted on now because it's not going away. And if it's not acted on, we know that unfortunately governments are going to regulate and make it very difficult for airlines and the system, make it very difficult for passengers. And that's not what we want. So yeah, it's up there at number one.
Right. And In your work, you of course interact with a lot of airline CEOs. You were with at Bastion, at Delta. You then were with Azul, and you've been everywhere. What is the biggest challenge that executives foresee when getting to that net zero by 2050 goal?
Yeah, I think every airline's slightly different depending on their operation. I think overriding it, when you talk to everyone in the industry, I think we're all on the same page. We know that electric vehicles are not going to solve the problem, particularly on long haul flights. We know that hydrogen aircraft, they're on the drawing board, all these things. Ultimately, the way we're going to get there quicker today is by sustainable aviation fuel. And we know that it's very expensive and there's not enough of it. And if somebody takes it from somebody else, we're just passing the problem around. We need to rapidly ramp up the production to be able to do that. That seems to be the biggest thing that comes out when we're talking about what people are doing about it.
Absolutely. And, on this podcast, we've had guests from Universal Hydrogen and Zero Avia to Heart Aerospace making the electric stuff, and CEOs of SAF companies like Gevo. You're right, SAF is the short-term solution, but digging a little further into detail, it's all about emissions. How do we lower emissions right now? And if I'm not wrong, Cirium has an emissions calculator right now, your global aircraft emissions monitor. How exactly are you using it? And tell us a little about that, please.
We're using it in a lot of different ways. So we started building the calculator. As I said before, we're incredibly lucky that we have these rich data sets that go back many years. And so when you bring those data sets together and you lay data science over the top, we're able to come out with some fantastically accurate, not just forecasts of what's likely to happen on a flight, but also retrospectively what happened. When you look at our fleet's information, for example, we're able to look at every single aircraft. Look at the engines, look at the winglets, look at the age degradation, look at the exact cabin configuration, how many first class, how many business, how many premium. And so we know exactly what the configuration of that aircraft is. When you overlay that with satellite tracking, there's turn around saying we know exactly when that aircraft pushed back, how long it taxied for, how long it was in the air. So not necessarily the distance, it's how long it was in the air. Did it hit headwinds on its journey? Was it stacking before it landed? Wheels down on the runway, back in the gate. That gives us phenomenally accurate about the amount that was being burnt during that and that configuration. We've built that into a model, and we've had that model verified for its accuracy with Virgin Atlantic and American Airlines, so two substantial airlines, and they're very public about it. And they've said, look, this is very, very close to what we're doing. It's not going to be perfect. People swap out equipment. Some people are using sustainable aviation fuel on certain legs. Some people have contrails. There's all these things, but it's the most accurate out there at the moment. Now we've got that. There are so many people within the aviation ecosystem that have got a different angle on what they need to get out of understanding emissions. And it's frightening how many people don't know where they are. So we see our role as letting people know this is where you are today. This is where your peers are. And then it gives them a benchmark to be able to go, right, are the actions that I'm taking improving? Or am I getting worse? But if you don't know where you are, you don't know the journey. So we've done that through our emissions, and we continue to deploy that data through all the services that we have, APIs, lookup tools, files, and embedding it into our clients' workflows.
Very interesting. It's like you've created a mirror for airlines to see this is how green you are, but the mirror shows it's pimples and warts and all. It's really
it does, but that's good. That's good. As I said before, if we don't know where we are, well, then we're not going to be able to measure whether the improvements we're making are actually making a difference. And I think that's half the battle. I think particularly before the pandemic, we were talking about it, and we were lots of meetings. We've all been to the events, and no one was really quite sure exactly what to do and how to do it. Now we're coming out of the pandemic. It's right. We need to invest in more fuel efficient aircraft. We need to get more sustainable aviation fuel. And then longer term, but we need to address it now. We need to get air traffic control and airlines talking a lot better, and actually making the changes that are going to drive it down for the industry, not necessarily just for the airlines themselves.
You're right, because I had the head of ESG for Wizz Air on the show recently, and she talked about how Wizz Air grew during the pandemic, and yet their emissions per passenger seat mile are down 15%. Now, of course, this metric, of course, favors the LCCs per seat mile kilometers. You include data such as cargo payload and the degradation in engine efficiency. Tell us how these granular metrics give us a more holistic figure than just a per seat mile cost or per seat mile.
And Shashank, I think it's also important as well that, and that's great. There are lots of different models and metrics that are out there at the moment. I go back to what I touched on before. The distance is one thing, but the distance is the amount of time that engine was running and what it was doing when it was running. So as I said, if you hit headwinds or you're stacking over Heathrow, and everyone always stacks over Heathrow, the distance is not going to be accurate to the actual emissions that have come off. So that's the first thing. When we look at our models, we're obviously trying to make sure that the variables that we load in, there are some very factual stuff, but the variables we load in are constantly being monitored. And one of those variables is the volume of passengers on there in terms of the percentage of passengers, and also those cargo loads. So we constantly look to see whether we've got those accurate. We take industry standards for the configuration of the aircraft, and that's where we take those things as we've come out of the pandemic are the ones that everyone needs to keep focus on. Passenger volumes are going up in terms of the amount they're getting on the seat. Cargoes were off the scale high during the pandemic. Now they're kind of balancing down a little bit. So those models need to continue to be accurate, which is what we invest in.
Right. Carbon calculation or carbon calculators for someone from the outside seems like a Wild West right now. There's so many of them. Even Google, in Google Flights, changed their methodology from including initially contrails and nitrogen oxide and the additive non-CO2 emissions, and then they decided to exclude it. So now it's only CO2 emissions, and the entire calculation changed. How is yours different, and how are you trying to separate the signal from the noise here?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I'll answer it in two different ways. On the contrails one, that's really hard. And we don't have it in our model. We look at it. We've tried to play data science on it. It's because not every flight has it. And then when it happens, it doesn't happen for the whole duration of the flight. It's really hard to report on and then predict. So we don't currently have it within the model, but it's something that we're playing with in data science. When we look at the different models, I think it's great that everyone's using them, but whether it's your booking on your online travel agent, whether people are taking generic numbers, we believe that as the industry really starts to effectively get measured, get fined or get rewarded on it, it's the accuracy which is the most important. And as I said before, we're very lucky. We've got that rich heritage of our data sets, particularly within our commercial fleet. We know that commercial fleet. We know the seat configurations, winglets. We know the engines. How all that comes together to make a very rich picture. Tick. When we look at that, we've actually got in those configurations 170 different fuel burn models, depending on what engines are on aircraft and which winglet. That's 170 different fuel models. Every time a new every time a new model comes out, either engine or winglet thing, we reconfigure that so that we know that we recalibrate our model. Ours is based on time, not on distance, and that's really important. We also look at that configuration of the seats. So we know that a business class seat in one airline is very different to a business class seat in another. So when you measure that cabin print by the inch, we look at how much carbon is taken up by inch of the seat. So if someone's sitting in a high density economy seat on one version of an A320 and someone's sitting on a less high density version of another A320, well, then they're going to emit less carbon. So we look at that and we put them in there. And then, as I said, we're not reliant on airlines providing this data. We receive data coming in from 800 airlines across the globe. So we are completely independent. We don't have a vested interest. We're here to make it as accurate as possible.
And I need to drill a little further into this. There was a recent discussion on LinkedIn that completely caught fire, which was around whether flying business class is more harmful or less harmful. And here was the counter. The obvious thinking is, you're taking up 3 times as much space as an economy class seat, and hence you're burning more fuel. But if you think about it, the argument was, if an airline takes a business seat out and puts in 3 economy class seats, then essentially the flight is burning more fuel because there are three people, they are heavy. There's three people, the three people might have six bags, which are heavier than the one business class passenger who's probably traveling carry on. And hence, there's more to this question. Where do you stand on this?
That's a really tough question. That's as you said, if LinkedIn ignited, I bet there were comments on both sides. I think it's interesting. I think I personally don't have a strong view because every airline, and our job is not to recommend how people lay out their cabins. It's just to report on the facts. And we know that airline A, business class seat, is less fuel efficient or less carbon efficient than airline B, and our job is to report on it. I think the interesting thing is we're going to start to see passengers make those choices. And we've said this before, and it might well start to make airlines think about how they do configure their cabins. And everyone's renewing their fleet and doing the good stuff. I strongly believe, and it's happening now, that as well as corporate travellers having a traveller T&E budget, they're also going to get a carbon budget. So when they're booking online, they can go, right, well, I can fly in that business class seat, or I can trade down because I'm running out of my carbon budget. Or I can take it, if I'm flying from Heathrow to JFK, I can look at my favourite airline and realise, well, it's not running a fuel-efficient flight. It's going to stack. It's going to burn more carbon, which I don't have. I need to fly a different airline at a different time on a more fuel-efficient aircraft with a slightly different layout in terms of the density. So I think you're going to start to get the corporate travellers making decisions based on those carbon, and that will help shape airlines in terms of how they decide to lay on their service in their cabins.
Now, carbon budget is a very interesting concept. I have seen it take form and shape in companies like Microsoft and others. Have you seen this being implemented in large corporates? Is it going mainstream in certain regions of the world?
I think it's starting. Everyone's talking about it. We sat with a client not so long ago, a couple of months ago, and we showed them their corporate travel. Their corporate travel over 3 months, and we laid down and we said that these were the carbon emissions on the flights that were available at the point of booking. This is what your team did, and they have two preferred airlines that they use across the Atlantic. One of them was way more efficient than the other one, and on the back of it, that corporate travel manager turned and said, "I need to stop using this airline." And that was a very large corporation with a large travel management process and budget going through. So yes, they didn't actually implement carbon budgets, but I can see it coming. It's coming more and more, particularly those larger organisations that have to report on their emissions and will get fined or will get called out by their investors and their clients if they don't do something about it. So yeah, it's definitely coming.
Do you think these carbon budgets might be mandated by governments, or would this be a more proactive approach from corporates?
That's a really good question. My personal view will come corporates first. I don't know. You might get some governments around the world doing it. I think it will come from responsible large PLCs that are having to report it, and to their shareholders will not take it that they're burning too much, or they're going to want to see reductions going on. So that's my personal view.
Yeah, I'm just thinking this through. The other hot topic of the day right now is Schiphol limiting annual departures from, I think, 500,000 to 460,000, and now I believe IATA and the airlines are suing the Dutch government. And I think it's a much easier conversation to have to say, here's a carbon budget rather than here is a cap on flights, because cap on flights is, it doesn't discriminate between people flying through or terminating in Amsterdam, and just penalizes everyone. Whereas carbon budget, you think and make your own better decisions.
Yeah, I mean, you want that data served up to you at point of booking. Either if you're traveling with your family for leisure, you want to see it on the online travel agents, or if you're flying for corporate travel, you want to be presented it. The flight's going to cost me X amount of dollars, which I can afford in my T&E budget, but I don't have enough carbon budget. I need to space slightly more to have a more fuel efficient flight as I go across the Atlantic. I think people are starting to make those decisions anyway. I think it'll start to get mandated by companies, which goes back to what we're saying about the accuracy of knowing what that future booking is. It's not just a generic A320, it's more fuel efficient, or it's not just a 777-300. This is the way it's configured. People want to know that in advance, and data science is going to be able to predict that, which is definitely what Cirium are doing and what we're seeing.
Do you see any airlines pushing this data directly to customers today? I know, for example, United's mobile app currently shows the CO2 emissions of that flight across the Atlantic on United Airlines, and you can see the difference between a 767 versus a 777-200 versus a 767 that takes 10 minutes extra because of stacking at the time of the day in Heathrow, and the emissions are different. Do you know of any other airlines that are being transparent about this data on the B2C side?
Yeah, I think they're trying to. I think what they do when you make your booking, if they're using their generic configuration, we know when airlines are going to swap out their equipment on the floor. So we're able to. It's very hard to predict it in the future. That's why it's data science. It's very easy to report on what happened. So I think it's a positive thing. I think where the difference is going to be is when they start giving that to the travel management companies, so that the corporate traveler will start making those decisions. And I go back to what I was saying when we were talking to that client. They looked at their two airlines across the Atlantic and realized that they needed to stop using one or start using the other one a lot more. All the information which is available is great. It's starting to help the consumer make a more informed decision if it's accurate.
When you work on these models, you said it is very easy to predict what's happened in the past, but it's hard to predict basically what's going to happen in the future. Is yours a real-time model, and do you do predictive analytics on this?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So we do it on it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Very easy to know what happens. So we know that there could be a schedule, and we know the configuration of their A320. So we're very easy to turn around and say this is what happened. They swap out the equipment. We update our data all the time, but we report on it every 24 hours. So we can report they swapped out the equipment. This is what happened. When you're predicting ahead, we sometimes get it wrong. So we know that equipment swapped out or a different aircraft was put in there. We then very quickly retrospectively mend it so that the clients that are using are reported on are actually getting that accurate data. But you're able to, with data science models, you're able to see what we know the configuration, we know which aircraft tend to be used on the route, we know the percentages. It's just a model that a lot of companies will be looking at similar things.
Because ultimately, as a consumer, if I'm booking a flight, I want to know what the actual emissions of my would-be flight will be.
Yeah,
not something that might have happened in the past.
No, absolutely. I think, and that's where that seat accuracy comes in as well. So that if I'm flying with an airline and I'm flying from Heathrow to JFK, and I can look on the schedule or on my online travel agent or my corporate booker and go, right, well, I know that if I fly in the morning, I know the equipment is older. And I know that the model says it's going to burn this amount if I take a premium economy seat, for example, versus the one that I can take in the afternoon. And that's all done with data science. That's models that will tell us. We know which aircraft it tends to be on those routes, and that's data science on there. And then, as I said, I think that's when people start making that informed decision. They'll either do the right thing and trade down. I've seen it in organisations where they'll get paid for taking a seat below what they're entitled to, and they grade in the company. And other people will just do it because it's the right thing to do. If you've got to get a flight 3 hours earlier, burning a fraction of the emission, you've got to do it. We're all in it together.
Until now, we have talked about current emissions and how do we reduce emissions, and how, of course, your data models can help consumers and corporates and airlines reduce emissions. The other aspect of getting to net zero, of course, in the next 40 years is fleet, changing to eVTOLs and the hydrogen aircraft and things like that. And even on that, I believe you have a Cirium fleet analyzer. And as part of that, you look at eVTOLs and electric aircraft. What are you seeing there? Is this becoming a reality, or are we still living in science fiction world?
Science fiction world. We've had our fleets analyzer for many, many years. And we put those eVTOL aircraft in there last year. So we've been collecting the data set. You're right. There were lots of things. Do we put it in? Do we put it in? We said, now's the right time to put it in. I think the key thing with it is that there are hundreds and hundreds of designs out there. And we know that some of them launch in a blaze of glory. They don't get any traction. They don't get anything. And then they fade away. The companies go away. But there are some which are now rising to the top and have got commitments and letters of intent and what we class as an order, but a letter of intent. Those are the ones that we do put into our fleets analyzer. And fleets analyzer has been around for many years, looking at the commercial fleet and the business aviation fleet. We know that those aircraft, those eVTOL aircraft, will come in. They will be happen. They'll be here for a long time. They'll start to get better and better. So we have to start reporting on it now. But even now, when you look at it, there's only, of all the ones we've got in there, we only track 14 different models that have got LOIs on them. So as soon as we start to get, I said there are hundreds of models out there, but no one's ordering them. And so as soon as you start to pick up, then we'll go to them. But there are 14 with around 6,000 letters of intent. So we'd cast as commitment. And so those are the ones that really are gaining traction.
Fantastic. Is this data public? I'm wondering if I can share it with my audience afterwards as in our show notes.
I'm sure we can help you.
Perfect. Now, one of the things when I was looking through the fleets analyzer tool you have was a prediction that there will be, in 2040, there'll be 44,000 new aircraft is what Cirium is predicting. Of this, what percentage will be the new generation and versus what percentage will be the typical aircraft that we know today? Yeah,
it's actually a really hard question to answer, Shasha. I think where there are 6,000 orders currently today, 6,000 orders for these eVTOL engines, there is no way that there'll be 6,000 of those in 2040. It's not going to happen. It will take a while for them to ramp up. It will take a while for them to be accepted, airspace, all these goods. And everyone's working really hard to make it happen because I think they do have a massive role to play within the aviation ecosystem. The vast majority of those 44,000 aircraft are going to be conventional aircraft. That's the retirements of the ones that we've got and the new generation. Every airline realizes that they have to fly new generation aircraft and retire the old gas guzzling fleet as quickly as possible, or they're not going to get anywhere close to their 2050 commitment. So there's a bit of an arms race now in terms of retiring the legacy fleet and giving up. So I still think it's going to be very much your conventional aircraft by 2040. Hopefully, running a lot more sustainable aviation fuel then.
Yeah, there you go. And I think that's where the supply of sustainable aviation fuel needs to increase. The price, of course, needs to come down. Carbon pricing needs to be incorporated in the traditional jet fuel, and hopefully there's a new equilibrium there.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. I think as we've said, the electric aircraft, hydrogen aircraft, we're not going to be flying across the Atlantic in the near future. But those eVTOLs, I think it's brilliant. I think it's great for the industry. The technology is exciting. I said there's lots of them around, but the ones that are really rising to the top, and we are going to see them. It's going to be a reality. We need to sort airspace out. We need to, because that's going to be an interesting one. But those short hops in terms of moving people around, it will be a piece of the aviation ecosystem. I don't see it being the aviation ecosystem for many years to come.
Right. And you're right. I think it's a fringe right now for especially long haul and longer distances. And then we still rely on planes being made today, basically, to be more efficient. Let's go back to data. The data is only as good as it's accurate. So how do you ensure that all of the data that you're studying and the calculator stays up to date with the changes, especially with the introduction of new aircraft? Because you do not have historical trends here to build on. It's a brand new aircraft.
Yeah. So on the aircraft, so as I said, we've got, I think as of today, around 170 different models for aircraft configuration with certain engines, the age of the engines, and then winglets. That's a piece of the fleet. Anytime something is new, we'll then go back and recalibrate the model, and the models take obviously time to come through. So it's something that it's not build it once and leave it in the corner. It has to be done. And then we have data science to be able to turn around and say, right, what's actually happening? How do we drive it in the future? We know that it's not just a question of different models coming on board. That's one element of it. But there's also different data sets that will help to make the aircraft, to help to make the models more accurate. As I said, particular one is around the volume of passengers filling that plane, which percentage, and those cargo ones as well. It's a variable. and we generically put that across the aircraft classification based on history. So that's one we need to permanently keep up to date. I go back to what I said. We were incredibly lucky to have and to work with Virgin Atlantic and American Airlines just to help us validate the model. Where they shared their fuel burn, and they said, "Look, this is," and we put a press release out about it, and we said, "Look, they're 99% accurate in where we are. Our job is to maintain that 99% accuracy."
Very nice. How are they using it? I'm curious. How does Virgin Atlantic use this data? Because I don't see them putting this out for the consumers while we're trying to book flights.
That's I can't go into that. They helped us very much in validating the model, and I think it's interesting that we've spoken to many airlines that helped us do it, but I think because everyone wants to have that benchmark of saying, right, if we can use a trusted independent source to say this is actually what it is for this airline flying this aircraft type, then everyone's got a benchmark. And if we can see, or if an airline can see that somebody else is burning a lot less, or is fuel, or is being more fuel, they know they need to do something about it. So I go back to what I said before. I think it's something that the industry, everyone's kind of in it together to try and solve it. If we don't work together, 2050 is that goal is a long way off. And you're seeing it now. You're seeing people working together and sharing and being like, this is what we're doing. What are you doing?
Exactly. And I think that was the high point for me at Farnborough last year, where everyone was talking about SAF. Everyone was talking about green technologies, and, all boats rise with the tide, I would say, here in this case. You mentioned 2050 is not that far away, 27 years actually. Are you an optimist? Do you think we'll get there as an industry?
I think that's a really good question. I do tend to be an optimist. I think when aviation is incredibly resilient, whenever there's a challenge, it's always come together to solve that challenge. We look at all the cycles. We look at the pandemic as an absolute classic one. Everyone rallied together to make it happen. So yes, I am optimistic. I think it's going to take, though. There's now a lot of intent. It's not so much talking. There's a lot of, right, how do we make this happen? I think it's going to make people working together that haven't worked closely together in the past to really drive it. And I use the example of air traffic control and airlines. Everyone knows that the air traffic control system just needs to be redesigned in terms of the airspace. And that will help to make travel for everyone more fuel efficient. It will enable the airlines to be able to deploy the fantastic tools and technology on the more modern aircraft they've got. We can fly more direct, et cetera, et cetera. And at the moment, obviously, there are various units. It's a very legacy, old-based system. And I'm living in London, and we have to fly across lots of different jurisdictions and airspace all across Europe to get anywhere. And air traffic controllers go on strike, and some aren't trained enough, and we have to go round. We need to get that sorted out. That it seems like something which is so very easy. I know it's not, but that's going to be way easier than creating the amount of sustainable aviation fuel that we're going to need to get there.
You're, of course, helping the industry measure their footprint and reduce their own emissions. I'm curious, what do you do in your own personal life? Do you tend to take the train to Amsterdam or Brussels? Do you turn off the lights? Do you go out? What do you do to reduce your own emissions?
No, I don't. I fly, and I fly. I probably cut down the amount of flying that we've done as a family. But look, I'm in the industry. I know that as soon as during the pandemic in London, as soon as we were allowed to fly, I made the family go on a flight down to Spain, and we were virtually the only ones on there with our masks, because I know we're all in it together. And whilst we are suppliers and partners of the industry, it's a very small world, and everyone's got short or long memories, and we know we need to come together. So the first flight we could pretty much allowed to take, we took it.
Good to know. The final part of this interview, Jeremy, is called the rapid fire round, in which we get to know you a bit more personally. Hopefully your staff will enjoy this. Your family will be surprised by hopefully some of the answers. And we start easy. For example, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book? there's a couple actually. I've just finished reading Legacy by James Kirk. That's the around how the All Blacks took their performance culture and really turned them into the New Zealand rugby team, the success that they are, and how you take that into business. I thought that was brilliant. Lots of things that I'm using it in every day. And then there's a book which I read a while ago, but Rekindle. I remember reading it, which was actually fantastic. It was Rekindle because they just played it on They've just done a series, and that was a book called Shantaram, which is probably my favourite book. I absolutely love it. Yeah, absolutely right. And they just had the mini series on there, and it's made me get the book out again and start rereading it again.
I remember buying Shantaram out of an auto rickshaw in Mumbai in 2006 or
2003. It came out. 2003. I remember reading it. It was a great book.
Yeah, absolutely. Good one there. What about your favorite movie? Another simple one.
Favorite movie? Look, Shashi, I don't have a favorite movie, but I genuinely don't. I love movies. Watch a lot of them. Go back and watch a lot of them a number of times. But so I'm going to give a real cliche. I've probably seen Shawshank Redemption over 20 times. And I know but it's one of those ones that when you watch it, you get something different out of it every time. And I know for a fact I've seen it over 20 times. It's a brilliant film. Is it my favourite? I don't know, because there are other ones that you watch, but it's certainly one that I love.
Interestingly, I had not watched that movie until I moved to the US, and at the company I was working with, when I introduced myself, somebody asked me, "So is it like Shawshank the movie? Is that your name?" And I had no clue what he's talking about. But since then, whenever I'm introducing and someone is confused about how to pronounce my name, I'll say it's like Shawshank Redemption, but without the W. So Shashank is my name. But absolutely love the movie. Good choice there. Next question. What about your favorite airline?
My favourite airline, being London based, I fly British Airways a lot, and they very much look after me. So I'd say my favourite airline is British Airways. I'm very lucky that I do get to fly on different airlines around the world. But coming out of Heathrow as my primary airport, I vast majority is British Airways, who are really great.
Glad to know. What about your favourite city?
Favourite city, London in the summer. London does an amazing summer. It's such a vibrant city. Winter less so. I was very lucky when a few years ago in a previous organisation, I had the opportunity my wife and I had the opportunity to live overseas for 5 years. So we were in Sydney and then Auckland and then Melbourne. And I look back at Sydney as such an amazing city. I absolutely loved our time down there. It was before we had children, and we had an amazing 5 years. But I'd probably say, if not London, I loved Sydney.
Fantastic. Definitely great. A great city. What about something that you want to learn?
Something that I want to learn. I again, another cliche, Shashi. I learn every day. And I kind of think, and not like you and probably a lot of the listeners, I'm relatively new into aviation. So I spent my previous career up until sort of 4 or 5 years ago in financial services. So I learn every day about aviation. I'm surrounded by amazing people who absolutely love what we do, how we do it. So that's great. So I'm learning from that. And also as a relatively new CEO, when you come into a role and then you're faced with the largest catastrophe ever to hit aviation, and we're all sat at home thinking how we're going to deal with it. My learning curve was on my baptism of fire as the new CEO was off the scale. So, and I still continue to learn, but as I said, I'm surrounded by amazing people and I interact with amazing people every day. And I know that after only a junior 5 years in the industry, I've still got a lot to learn.
Good answer there. Who do you look up to, Jeremy?
I don't look up to a person or individual. I actually look up to characteristics. And so if I see a leader who's demonstrating great traits, that's what I respect and that's what I like. So I love when I see leaders being incredibly authentic. That means a lot to me. When people are instilling that strong work ethic, and also when they do the right thing, not the easy thing. It's very easy not to do that. And so when I see those traits in individuals and I see those in leaders, that's what I look up to and respect.
And final question: what is the best advice you've received?
Best of all, I was asked this question the other day, so I'll give you the same answer. It was I'm going to paraphrase this because I can't remember exactly what he said. It was from my father many years ago. I think I must have been late teens. And he turned around and said something along the lines of, he said, look, if you're going to do something, do it to the absolute best of your ability. Give it everything you've got. Don't leave anything out there on the pitch. So if it doesn't work, you know that you weren't good enough, but you gave it your best shot. If you don't do that and it doesn't work, you're always going to be questioning, well, could I have done something different? And so that's kind of how I try and bring myself to work. If you're going to do it, absolutely do it. And if it didn't work, well, guess what? We tried and we weren't good enough, and we'll do something.
Fantastic. Jeremy, this was very enriching, and I'm glad we took what could be a geeky topic like data and hopefully made it more accessible to the listeners. I'm incredibly grateful to Cirium for being the season sponsor of this podcast, getting these really important conversations about sustainability out to the world. And you are doing a phenomenal work, and thank you for joining us.
Shashank, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. Awareness is the key to a green future, so please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing us with your network or leaving a review. For more information on how aircraft emissions data can help you reach your sustainability goals, visit Cirium from the link in the show notes. You can start a conversation with us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.